All right, so here's my short-term objective. I want to get through the 6 types of consequences, which is going to be a little instructional period for you, basic principles, and then 4 functions. So putting this in context, when we look at problem behavior, we talk about problem behavior occurring as one part of the 4-term contingency. And the 4-term contingency is setting events that set the stage for problem behavior, antecedents that immediately precede and trigger problem behavior, the problem behavior itself, and then the consequence that's maintaining the problem behavior. So let me talk for a moment about setting events. So setting events is kind of like having, it's a behavioral equivalent of a bad hair day. It doesn't trigger problem behavior, it doesn't guarantee problem behavior, but it increases the probability or likelihood of problem behavior. If problem behavior is a trigger being pulled, then a setting event is increasing the sensitivity of that trigger, making it a hair trigger. And we all have setting events, by the way. This isn't unique to people with autism or those engaging in problem behavior. We all have setting events. So physiological setting events. I think about the primary ones that our students experience can be fatigue, because a lot of our kids, students have problems with sleep. So they might have woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning and haven't been back to sleep before they show up to school. And then at some point in the day, they become fatigued. That's just their biology. And when they're tired, they become grumpy. And then things that might not typically trigger a problem behavior are more likely because they're tired. And if they weren't tired, then it wouldn't have triggered the problem behavior. They would have dealt with it with the antecedent. If they're hungry, a lot of our kids have limited diets, and they might not be eating before school. They could be hungry. They could be in pain. A lot of our kids, all kind of related to the diet, have gastrointestinal issues and chronic constipation. I can't tell you how many kids I work with where constipation is a massive problem. And we can start to see the signs of discomfort where they can't sit on their bums and they're wiggly and they're irritable and distracted. And then you talk to mom and she hasn't pooped in 4 days. Okay? Well, she has every right to be irritable, right? So we need to be sensitive to and recognizing these physiological setting events that aren't immediately triggering problems, but put the kid on edge and more likely to engage in problem behavior. We need to be aware of these. Those are physiological, could be ecological, like things in the environment. So some of our kids get on edge with things that are noisy, or if things are unpredictable, or if there's a new staff or sub because they're not associated with the way things usually should be run, or if the schedule goes off. Those are ecological setting events that might not trigger problems, but now increase the likelihood that something is going to be an antecedent for problem behavior. There's also behavioral histories, which is some historical altercation of some kind that they kind of remember. This is an interesting one. And I used to think that this was kind of an outlier. It doesn't really happen a whole lot, but I've kind of changed my opinion on that. If a student has had a bad experience with someone somewhere, just going back to that place or with that person can kind of put them on edge and be a setting event in terms of behavioral history. The one that really stands out in my mind is I was working with a young man with autism. He was 12. He was very large, probably 180 pounds at 12. And he and his SCA, we took him on a community outing, and then we were stopping at 7-Eleven to get a Slurpee before we went home. And as we pulled into 7-Eleven parking lot, he seemed to become suddenly agitated, and we couldn't figure out why, out of the blue, so to speak. It wasn't. And as we're moving through the parking lot, he's becoming increasingly distressed. And then we pull into the parking stall, and he gets really angry, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. We're going to get Slurpees. This is on your schedule. You like Slurpees. And we go to get out of the car, and he becomes aggressive. He starts to attack the female SEA who's been driving the car. We couldn't get out and go into 7-Eleven. We're really shocked that this is happening. We bundle him back into the car. We drive him as quickly and safely as we can home. We had to pull over on the highway twice because he was going to get out of the car. And we still haven't figured out what's going on here. And we get into the house, and Mom is there. And she can see that we're in distress. And she's like, well, what happened? Well, we were going to 7-Eleven. Right away she goes, 7-Eleven on Marine Drive? Yeah? Where did you park? Well, we're looking at where did we park? Well, we pulled into the parking lot. You didn't park the second on the right, did you? I'm like, what the? We're looking at you. Yeah, we did park the second on the right. She's like, no, you can't go to 7-Eleven and park the second stall on the right. I'm like, why? Why didn't we know this? Well, because 2 years ago, he went to get Slurpees with his dad. They pulled into 7-Eleven. They parked on the second stall on the right. They went into 7-Eleven, and the Slurpee machine was broken. He didn't get a Slurpee. So to him, parking on the second stall on the right signals, I'm not going to get a Slurpee when I go in here. And that makes him very angry. We couldn't have known that, right? We never forgot it. We went back to that 7-Eleven repeatedly. We're very sensitive about where we parked. The first time we parked a couple blocks away and walked into 7-Eleven, right? We never went back to that stall. It wasn't worth the battle, right? But that sounds out as a behavioral history, right? That just put them on edge and caused all that problem. Like getting out to go get the Slurpee was the actual antecedent. That's when he really went off. And if we hadn't parked in that spot, getting out to go get the Slurpee would not have triggered problem behavior. It was only because the setting event was present. So that's setting events. We need to be sensitive to those because sometimes they're there, they're not always there. There doesn't have to be a setting event. And again, we have these. If you're on your way home and you're stuck in traffic and you haven't eaten, you have a headache, you've got low blood sugar, you're just not feeling really well, a bit of road rage, and then you get home and someone asks you to take out the trash and then you snap, I can't take out the trash, I'm having a horrible day. That antecedent usually wouldn't trigger that little tantrum in you, but because you had low blood sugar and you were tired and a headache, now you act unreasonably, right? A normal antecedent wouldn't usually lead to that, but it's because of the setting event. So one of my colleagues likes to joke that this is a really useful strategy in marriages, right? You should train your spouse about setting events so that when you arrive home, you can say, it's been a setting event day. Because they were thinking, oh, good, you're home. You can chop vegetables and take out the trash. And when you identify a setting event day, they can say, oh, why don't you have a glass of wine and put your feet up? Yeah. And then you'll abuse that, won't you? Every day is a setting event day. Questions. What is the likelihood of success if there's little continuity between home and school life? Let's on a continuum. The ideal gold standard would be complete kumbaya, continuum, collaboration between home and school, right? Truly members of the same team. That would be great. However, there's often a complete lack of continuity between home and school. That does not mean that you cannot make significant gains in one setting or the other. Things cannot be going well at school, but really, really well at home. Or they cannot be going well at home, but going really, really well at school. And again, this goes back to the environment is the key player, right? It doesn't really matter what's happening at home because when you're talking about school, because we control the school environment. We can have expectations that are met at school that would seem incomprehensible at home, right? Impossible at home. Or vice versa. So it's not an excuse to say, well, there's a lot of problem behavior at home, so what can we do at school? There certainly is carryover, no question about it. It would be better if there was more continuity. But just because maybe the school doesn't have the support of the home, doesn't mean school can't be a whole lot better. And just because school might be difficult doesn't mean home can be a whole lot better. Right? The behavioral term that underlies this is called stimulus control. Right? I have the saying that all the world is stimulus control. Stimulus control is this really powerful principle. If you understand how stimuli in the environment or triggering behavior or occasioning behavior, that allows each environment to kind of operate in isolation, right? I can have a child who's behaving beautifully in my class, even though he behaves terribly in other classes because I've got this really effective instructional control, no aversive contingencies, all positive reinforcement, and that's stimulus control. So we can have high expectations no matter what's happening somewhere else, with the caveat that we would like those high expectations universally applied. 2, how would you approach the issue of school only allowing a child to attend a small portion of the day? Unfortunately, this happens more often than we think, where the school might say, due to problem behavior, he's only able to come for 15 minutes. And that might be initially appropriate and defensible. And my kind of broad approach to this would be, if this is the case, then you need to have a concrete, in-writing, systematic plan for how tomorrow will be 20 minutes and the day after 25 minutes. And you will have an objective and you won't just kind of wing it day by day and not really have a plan and wind up it's still only 15 minutes 2 months later. It's really not appropriate to have that level of unpredictability. I've worked with some families actually where parents have lost jobs because they kept getting called when they got to work to go pick up their kid day after day after day. Right? That's not fair to the family, it's not fair to the child, it's not fair to the school. So I think what really is needed in a situation like this is a systematic plan that everyone knows and adheres to. These successive approximations, these incremental steps every day. Like I showed you the data yesterday of the boy who was removed from class and he wasn't spending any time in class. And then they set up a plan with goals that he has to be in class. You can't decide not to take him to class. Be strategic, right? Be premeditated about when you take him there because you control the learn unit, but you have to take him there. So extending that logic to here is he has to be here for 20 minutes. So find a way to make it work. And then tomorrow he'll be here for 25 minutes. Find a way to make it work. Even if you're not doing anything remotely academic, he has to be here and systematically build that up. That's a kind of an overly simplified response to a complicated question.